Welcome to the Hope for the Animals podcast, sponsored by Compassionate Living. I'm your host, Hope Bohanec, and you can find all our past shows and more information about us on our website, hopefortheanimalspodcast.org, and you can find my contact information there as well. I would love to hear from you. Happy Earth Day, everyone. It is Earth Month. April is Earth Month, and we're coming up on Earth Day. And this is going to be a special Earth Day episode. We're going to focus on the environmental impacts of animal agriculture. And I'll soon be bringing in our guest, Karthik Sekar. He will be talking about new technologies for a world after meat. But I wanted to start with some news related to Earth Day and also talk about some personal solutions I would love to offer. First, though, there was a recent IPCC report, that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and they do this deep and comprehensive report about the state of climate disruption about every 7 years. And their 7-year report just came out recently. And they found that the effects from climate change are getting even more severe, worse than previously predicted. Extreme weather events, losing more ice, losing more coastal areas. All of this is happening at a much more rapid rate than previously thought. And I think we can all feel that and see that in the news reports around weather. You just see it daily. You hear about it daily from all parts of the globe. So we must stay under that 1.5 degree increase to avert the worst of the worst from happening. We're now at about 1.1. So we can't keep hitting the snooze button on this issue. This report is an alarming wake-up call that we have to take action now. So I've talked about this problem extensively on this podcast, the harms and impacts of animal agriculture on the environment, and I've had wonderful expert guests on as well talking about this issue, and I certainly will again. But today I thought we would focus on solutions. It's Earth Day. We're celebrating the Earth. So let's talk about some positive things that we can do both personally and that we can support on a systematic level. So with that in mind, I wanted to share with you all some personal things that I do, that Kojin and I do in our household to live more ecologically. On the last episode, we had Jasmine Singer on the podcast, and she shared with us all about how she's making her house net zero. And I wanted to share with you kind of the poor gal's version. So no big costly renovations, but just things that you can do around the house to reduce your impact. And, if you do own your home and you can do those big projects, that's awesome. Please do. But for those that are unable to do those kind of big projects, solar panels and that kind of thing, here's some smaller suggestions. Well, maybe not smaller, but more accessible. Let's say more accessible solutions and suggestions. So the first and biggest piece, of course, is to live vegan. This reduces the harm that your lifestyle and your household causes to the environment considerably. So if you have that going on, that's awesome. And if you are feeling comfortable in buying and eating vegan, then you might consider taking it to the next level, taking next level vegan, next level eco living, right? And incorporating a few of the things that I'm going to be talking about here. So these are some things that Kojin and I do in our household to reduce our carbon footprint, reduce our ecological impact. And one thing is that we have only one electric car for the two of us. No car would be best. And if you can do that, then you're rocking it. That's awesome. But in non-pandemic times, I did a lot of tabling where I have a car full of vegan literature and t-shirts and all of that, and would go do educational tabling at events, and will hopefully be getting back into that someday soon. So I need a vehicle for that. We both primarily work from home, though, so it's worked out really well for us to just have one car. When we made the decision it's been years now, years ago, to not replace our second car, we thought at that time, if there was ever a time when we both really needed a car the same day, we would rent a car for one of us. Like one of us would rent a car. But we haven't had to do that. It's been fairly easy, a lot easier than we thought it was going to be. But we also, like I said, both, have the privilege of working from home. So it wouldn't work out for everyone. We also don't have kids, so that helps a lot. But yeah, just, thinking about reducing that household impact down to one car is a great thing. Okay, so let's move into the kitchen. So one of the biggest impacts in the kitchen is paper and plastic. Paper or plastic, that horrible question at the supermarket where you pull out your cloth bag and say, neither, right? So in the kitchen, paper and plastic, paper towels are still so widely used in the kitchen, and it's so unnecessary. I haven't used paper towels for decades. I just have cotton kitchen towels for everything. Organic cotton is best if you can afford it. Mine come from the thrift store, so they can be much cheaper. and I have clean ones hanging, around for wiping hands, wiping countertops. And then I stash some rags, more kind of gunky stained towels for the kind of big messes and yucky jobs. Please don't buy paper cups or paper napkins, anything like that. It's just not necessary. Use the reusable. Everything in the kitchen, you already have it in your household. So use the reusable and washable stuff, and you'll save trees and eliminate paper use. Plastic is much harder. Plastic is, it's really, really it's just everywhere, right? It's ubiquitous. It's very hard to avoid. I've really tried to reduce my plastic use. It's very difficult. The food that you buy in plastic packaging, that's a huge impact. And so when I'm at the store, I really try to be mindful of every product and really assess it, right? As vegans, we already do that. We're already scrutinizing the ingredients and making sure that it's vegan. Well, if you're already comfortable with that, now maybe take it to the next level and assess the product ecologically. Is it organic? Is it in a plastic container? Is there another option, glass or some other material? And okay, so there's one in glass, but it's not organic. And then the organic one is in plastic. Ugh, I run into this all the time. Well, you just do the best you can, right? Make an assessment, do the best we can. And this is where living earth-friendly and living vegan, it really goes along with living mindfully. I mean, you can make every shopping experience a meditation on nonviolence and making the best choices we can for the planet and for the animals. Try not to get overwhelmed, though, and lose your mind about how bad it is because there's just no tofu that isn't in plastic. I just get driven crazy by this. Okay, breathe. We're having a mindful shopping experience. And laugh too, because it can be overwhelming, of course. So one area that I have been able to reduce my plastic considerably is produce shopping. I now buy all my produce in cloth bags, and I have all kinds of different size cloth bags that I use. And then I put my produce in the fridge in these cloth bags that you get wet. They're damp. You get them damp. And they're made for produce use. They're these big, kind of like a pocket, and you put the produce in and kind of wrap the damp cloth around it. And not only is it a huge reduction in our plastic use, I think it keeps the produce longer. So look for these produce bags that you can use to keep your produce in the fridge. So making our own food has also been a huge reduction in our plastic packaging. So Kojin and I now make our own nut and seed milks. So it's just buying the seeds and nuts. So it's like zero packaging, basically. I make my own granola. Kojin makes his own hummus. So this has helped to reduce our packaging considerably. Of course, this can be time consuming, and that was my concern, the reason why I didn't do these things for a long time. So we just brought them in kind of one at a time when we had time. And now they're in our weekly routine, and they actually don't take a lot of time at all now that we have them kind of incorporated into our routine. Okay, moving on to the bathroom. This is another area where there can be a lot of plastic packaging for body care products. So I'm lucky in this area here because I use very little product in the bathroom. I am a low maintenance woman. I have like my teeth stuff, shampoo and soap, and that's about it. I do put makeup on to give presentations, but it's very minimally, and I use very little, and I have like the same tube of mascara that I've had for like a decade, so that's how little I use. But Kojin actually uses more product than I do. Hey, no judgment there. And, no judgment to anyone. You got to do what you got to do to feel good in this world. And, I get it. So just do the best you can when choosing those products as far as the ingredients and the packaging. Of course, all bath and beauty products should be vegan with no animal testing. I mean, that's just should be baseline. But as far as the eco goes, I get bars of soap with minimal or no packaging. There's bulk soaps that don't have any packaging, and I actually have a bag specific for soap when I go shopping so that doesn't get food in it because it's, going to have a soapy kind of residue. But so I have a bag for bulk soap bars. And please try to avoid liquid soap in the plastic container. It's just not necessary. Get a bar. And then for shampoo, that's harder. It's harder to find shampoo that's not in a plastic bottle. I have tried I tried a shampoo bar. I'll say one brand, and I didn't like it. They have a shampoo bar is basically it's like a bar of soap, but it's to lather up and use in your hair. And I didn't like the one I tried. I should really give another brand a try. I need to do that. If anybody out there has a brand of shampoo bar that they like, let me know. I want to try again. I need to try again. But again, here in California, I'm very lucky because in Sacramento, there is a bulk store called Refill Madness. Get it? Refill, like reefer madness, refill madness. It's okay, very silly name, kind of clever, very silly. But anyway, I'm able to refill my shampoo bottles there, as well as my liquid laundry detergent. So I'm able to do a lot of refilling of bottles there at that bulk store. They even have a brand where they go to the warehouse and refill their bottles. So it's just zero plastic use. So I'm always sure to buy that brand. Your local co-op or natural food store might also have bulk liquid options, all kinds of bulk options that you may not have thought of. So look around, look for those. Laundry, shampoo, maple syrup, all kinds of things can be bought in bulk. So moving on to tooth care, we've moved over to this organic corn floss that comes in a reusable glass container. So they're like these little glass vials, and you can buy the refillable floss to put in it. So you only need one of the vials, and you start buying the reusable or refillable floss, not reusable, refillable floss to add to the container. And it's corn floss, organic corn floss, vegan wax. You got to be careful with eco flosses. Sometimes they're made from silk, sometimes they use beeswax, but you can find vegan options. I think back on all the little plastic containers of floss that I have thrown away over the years. Oh God, I'm so grateful there's this option now. We also buy bamboo toothbrushes, and we buy them in boxes of like 12. They're bulk boxes of 12, so very little packaging. And now there's also tooth powders in eco glass containers or other eco, like metal. I think I've seen some in metal. And they replace plastic toothpaste tubes. And we order all this stuff online. And I've even discovered bamboo Band-Aids online. So these eco Band-Aids that are made from bamboo. It's so cool. I mean, I'm just so grateful that there's all these amazing options out there. And of course, these things do cost a little more. So, you've got to work that into your budget, and maybe you can't, and that's okay. Or maybe just a few things. So, all of this has taken me years to transition to. All this stuff did not happen overnight. So, how I did it was just focusing on one thing at a time, like, say, the floss, and I would try some brands, figure out what worked, how to get it, made it routine. And then once I was comfortable with that, then moved on to the next thing. So try not to overwhelm yourself, take it as slow as you need to, but be steady about it. I still am trying to improve wherever I can. But I really love this meditation on how to live more earth friendly, how to live more nonviolently. It feels good to me, especially when I hear reports like that one I talked about earlier from the IPCC. It's so, if you feel so out of control, it's so big. But this is what I do have control over, what I can change. And I hope that it inspires you to also think about ways that you can reduce your impact. There's so many more ideas and ways to reduce your carbon footprint, but I'm going to stop here because we have a really interesting interview to get to. So if you have some thoughts or ideas about how you're making your life more eco-friendly and you want to share those, please go to our Facebook page or our Instagram page and look for this post, the post of this episode, and share your eco ideas with what you do to make your life less impactful on the environment. Okay, so let's move on to our interview now, and I'll just introduce this segment of the show with a few thoughts. So I am a hippie at heart. I wish we could change the world with homemade tofu and bean burgers, but I also have a practical side. And I want a lot of tools in the toolbox to save as many animals as possible, as quickly as possible. And I'm also kind of a sci-fi fangirl, and I love thinking about the replicators on Star Trek and how they have all the meat dishes, but it's all replicated energy, and there was no animal suffering, no animals slaughtered. So the flip side to my flower power girl feels that we are gonna need technology to work for us, to work for nature, to help us reverse this horrible strain that we've put on the earth. So I find the technology aspects of the new meat movement really fascinating. And even though I have my reservations about it, I want to learn about it. I totally understand being wary of technology. I'm a huge skeptic too. But we have to keep in mind that almost everything that humans do is manipulative. I mean, when we lived in huts and had fire pits, that's still manipulating nature, right? It's the result of the manipulation that matters, the effect on nature that we have to look at and have to address. So let's find those technologies that help, that benefit nature, that benefit animals and us, and that will offset the harmful manipulations and the harmful systems that we have in place now. So I put on my geek hat for this interview, and I really hope you enjoy it. Here we go. Today we have Karthik Sekar. He is joining us from the Bay Area here in my area of the world in California. He has a doctorate in chemical engineering from Northwestern University. He researched bioreactor design and systems quantitative biology, and he works as a senior data scientist for Climax Foods. He's been long passionate about getting us to a vegan world, and he's written the book After Meat, The Case for an Amazing Meat-Free World. Welcome to the podcast, Karthik.
Thank you, Hope. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so glad you could join us. So we like to start all the guests off with your vegan origin story. So why did you go vegan? When did you go vegan? Tell us your vegan origin story.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say it started when I was in college. So roughly 15 years ago, I had this notion that eating meat was just bad for the environment. And, I was kind of even just sort of thinking about, it's just kind of absurd that we grow these grains that we feed to animals and then we eat the, flesh and products from the animals. And it just struck me as a wasteful process. And so from that vantage, I then decided to become vegetarian in college 15 years ago.
Hmm.
And then I would say about 5 years ago, I was talking with some friends just about animal agriculture and the production of animal products. And someone pointed out to me that in order for us to have dairy products, a mom cow, a female cow, has to constantly be pregnant. So she has to be, forcibly impregnated. And then she's, birthing, calves. And then, the industry is taking advantage of the resultant milk. And it just sort of hit me like a ton of bricks. Like,
Yeah.
of course, like have to make sure that, these cows are pregnant in order to, produce milk. And then these calves are, turned into dairy subsidizing veal steaks, through some really, really heinous processes that I'm sure you and your audience are well familiar with. And so from that point, when I had that realization, I vowed to myself to take the full plunge into veganism. And so I've been vegan for about 4 years, and it's been great.
Awesome. Just to not assume that everyone knows, the calves in the dairy industry, like you were saying, are taken from their mother soon after birth. It causes psychological trauma to the mother cows as well as the babies. And those babies, either if they're males, go to slaughter for veal or beef, and the females then are confined, separated from the mom, separated from each other, and as soon as they're old enough, are put back in the system, artificially inseminated. It's a miserable life for these cows. So yeah, just wanted to clarify and never assume that everyone knows.
Yeah.
So you have written this book called After Meat, and you pack a lot into this book. You set us up with a lot to think about. There is so much in here. You've got the scientific method and evolution and the naturalistic fallacy and really interesting history of food technology throughout the book. I mean, you get into psychology and even quantum physics theory. I mean, there's just really a lot. You've got to put on your thinking cap for this one, folks. And I appreciated that you had at the end of each chapter a glossary of terms and a chapter summary, and that was very helpful. So it's a lot of information, very intellectual, but also an easy read. I mean, you make it so that it's easy to read. And you even get into mindfulness and meditation. So much, really a lot packed into this book. But what we want to talk about is that you talk about disruptive technologies and how technologies often have a ceiling, and then there's a what you call disruptive technology that comes in to improve on the old technology. And you talk about how turning animals into animal products is an inefficient technology, and you mentioned it in your opening statement. And you said in this book, I'll read a quote from the book, quote, "Animal technology is ultimately limited by its inherent design." So can you explain this?
Yes. And first, Hope, thank you for introducing the book. Yes,
Yeah.
I know there's a lot of threads and a lot of ideas, and I hope there's an emergent big picture that makes sense, after reading the book.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yes, you're focusing on the key thesis of the book, which is that animals are inherently limited by their design, and they're just not technologically great, for production.
Mm.
And so what I mean by this is, first taking a step back and just sort of talking about technology in general. So technology is, something that we humans uniquely invent to solve problems. So we think about, a microwave to heat our food, or a computer, to communicate and, do our taxes. And all technology has a limit. There are certain things that technologies can't do. There are certain things that if you improve on it further that, inherently get limited by. So the most intuitive analogy that I use in the book is with light bulbs. So hope you and I can, remember from, 20, 30 years ago that incandescent light bulbs were pervasive. So this is what we use to light our homes, and, we're just everywhere. Mm-hmm. And incandescent light bulbs work through the physics of a electrical current surging through a wick. And this wick, when heated, will illuminate. And so basically what you're doing is you're heating the wick and then you're getting illumination. But with the advent of light emitting diode technology, or LEDs, we could actually replace the incandescent light bulbs with these LED bulbs. And these bulbs work through the physics of electroluminescence, where you just have to flow a current and then you get light. You don't actually have to do any sort of heating of filament. So the previous incandescent light bulb is inherently flawed by design. So it can't really be improved that much further because you always have to heat in order to get light. There's no way to decouple the two. And in contrast, a LED light bulb doesn't have this restriction. You can just get the light. You don't need the heat. And so as a result, the efficiency is just much greater. So LED light bulbs get on average 5 to 10 times more light per energy input versus an incandescent light bulb. And so in a similar way, using animals to produce meat, dairy, clothing is also flawed by design. And specifically, the physics of animals at play here are their size. So animals grow, pretty big. And so this means that they need extensive circulation systems. So these circulation systems are needed to purvey nutrients around their body and to shuttle waste to exits. Because of these circulation systems and because of the size of animals, it actually inherently limits the production capabilities. So you can't do things very fast with animals. It takes a cow roughly a full year to grow, to full size.
Yeah.
And then also just in terms of yield, much of your audience and you and I are just very familiar with how wasteful the animal agriculture industry is. So, just for perspective, about only 3 to 4% of what's fed to cows is actually like reaped in terms of like a physical product, in terms of mass. So that means, you feed, 100 grams to a cow, you get roughly 3 to 4 grams in actual like meat, dairy, or clothing. And part of the reason why it's so wasteful is because of things like a circulation system that, a cow has to, spend resources to run the circulation system.
So can you explain what you mean by the circulatory system, or how that relates? Just kind of clarify that.
Yeah. Just to clarify. So when I mean circulation system, I mean like the blood circulation and the cow's metabolism. So yes. So we can kind of think of it this way. So when a cow eats food, that food is metabolized. I think it's useful to think about it being metabolized to energy. And that energy can kind of go to one of two places. So it can go to what's called maintenance functions. So maintenance is just anything needed for the cow to live, right? So a cow, needs to breathe. A cow has a beating heart. A cow has a consciousness. A cow has to, be able to detect, friend or foe, socialize, so forth. So she will, naturally use some of that, food that she consumes to energize, some of these metabolic processes. And the other sink of where this, energy input is going in terms of metabolism is the cow's biomass. So, she's building muscle, she's building fat, she's building bone. And this biomass is what animal agriculture is reaping, right? So this is what they're monetizing and, turning into animal products. Uh-huh. And so my argument in after meat is that just because of the physical design of cows from an evolutionary standpoint, they can never, produce that much biomass versus maintenance. So they're always going to have a significant maintenance cost. And this naturally detracts from the overall process. So you feed, 100 grams of grain, you only get 3 to 4 grams of, meat, dairy, or clothing.
Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. And I'll just add that there is the factor of outside inputs of resources that are so, energy intensive, and all the grain and water that's wasted. It's just a wasted process. You're not getting out as much as you're putting in.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so animals are an inefficient technology, and we're exposing that now as animal activists. So producers of animal products are now trying to, quote, improve their pollutive and harmful industry with things like regenerative grazing and methane capture and other, quote, improved technologies. Why is this not the path we should take? Why do we need to disrupt the entire system?
I love this question, Hope. It's a great question. And I should say that regenerative agriculture, has really come to head more recently. So basically
Yeah.
after I finished the book. But if this had happened earlier, I would have definitely taken my time to just dismantle this idea of regenerative animal agriculture.
Mm.
Yeah, so the issue is, as I was kind of emphasizing in the last answer, is that animals are just inherently flawed. Like there's just a limit of what we can do with them, and any sort of dressing and interventions that we come into it, it's just not going to be as great as a potential replacer, and developing that replacer further. So, for example, I would like to highlight land usage. I think land usage is probably, one of the biggest environmental costs to animal agriculture.
Yeah.
And to appreciate the magnitude of the problem, I've seen figures that 30% of the ice-free land on planet Earth is being, used for animal agriculture. So that's to, either, raise animals or to grow the crops that then feed animal agriculture. And the reason why this occurs is because animals are just so inefficient. So, it takes nearly a year for a cow to grow, full size. And so if you had an alternative technology, like microbial fermentation, which grows about 1,000 to 10,000 times faster than cows, you would need a fraction of the same amount of land. And so regenerative agriculture, doesn't solve, all these problems. So it doesn't actually solve the land usage problem. In fact, it actually exacerbates it.
Right. Uses more land. Yeah.
Yeah. And, concentrated animal feeding operations, they are definitely awful from an ethical point of view. But I would actually argue they're the outgrowth of the inefficiencies of animals, right? Producers have figured out, you stuff animals in close quarters and you force feed them, you get a more economically viable process.
Yeah.
And so to turn to something like regenerative animal agriculture, we're kind of going back, to where we were before, and, making something very expensive and actually in some ways even more environmentally calamitous. So instead, the best strategy for us is just to abandon animals as a production technology and find and develop newer ones, such as microbial fermentation.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to ask you about this because, of course, we're throwing out these big, interesting words, microbial fermentation. And that will be my next question. But I did want to just pull on this a little bit further. And I loved how in your book you talked about disruptive technologies and how it's not necessarily like you use the light bulb analogy, but I liked your car analogy as well, because sometimes the replacement is something completely different. I mean, we replaced the horse, and like you said in the book, not with a mechanical horse, right? It's something completely different, the car. I thought that was really interesting. And so the replacement technology, the disruptive technology, can sometimes be very, very different. And so now let's talk about fermentation engineering and microbial fermentation. And this is what you're mainly talking about in the book. This is what you mainly propose. First of all, tell us what it is, just kind of break it down what it is. And I was really fascinated to read in your book that there's already products like this on the market. Corn, spelled Quorn, is a meat-free product that's been on the market for a while now, and they're not all vegan. Some of their products are vegetarian, some are vegan, but that's made from a fungal single-celled organism. You pointed out in your book, probably grown in a bioreactor, I assume. So tell us about all this. Why is this fermentation engineering good for the planet? Why do you propose this?
Sure, sure. Yes. And despite the high sounding words, fermentation engineering and fermentation technology is actually a fairly ancient technology. It's actually one of our oldest food technologies. So I'll start with just probably the most salient case in which we understand fermentation, and that's with alcoholic beverages. So when we make beer, we start with a grain, typically barley. That barley is boiled and homogenized into a sugar solution. And that sugar solution is cooled down, and we seed it with yeast, with baker's yeast. And these yeast will actually eat the sugars within this sugary wort solution, the sugary grain solution. They'll do this in a bioreactor. So a bioreactor, in this case, your audience can just imagine a big bucket. It's really nothing. It's really not much more sophisticated than that.
Kind of like a big vat, right?
A big vat, yes.
Yeah.
You'll have control over things like temperature, oxygen, maybe things like pH, but you can just kind of think of it like a vat with a little bit more bells and whistles in terms of controlling the environment. And the controlling of the environment becomes important for these microbes, such as yeast, because, as we learned, through thousands of years of human history, these microbes, when they eat these sugars, they'll actually convert it to alcohol, CO2, to other, aromatic compounds. So, if you're a fan of, craft beers, those rich aromas come from these microbes eating the sugars and basically chemically converting them to these flavor compounds. And yeah, so that's classic, fermentation with the example of making beer.
Mm-hmm.
And with more modern fermentation engineering and fermentation technology, the alternative food space is, starting to take notice. And, Corn, Quorn, is a great example. And the way this works is it's a microbe. It's a single cell fungus. So it's actually a fungus. It's not a bacteria.
Huh.
And yes, it's grown in a bioreactor, and it produces this protein matrix. So it basically secretes this protein. It's what's called a mycelium. So if you've had mushroom, like you're buying mushrooms, from the farmer's market, or you're foraging it yourself, that sort of like spongy matrix is the mycelium. And yeah, so you have this mycelium mush, and then it can be fashioned into quote unquote meat products. So you can make your nuggets, you can make your steaks, you can make your quote unquote chicken breasts. Much in the same way that like the traditional meat processing industry makes it from the meat mash.
Okay. And you were saying that this technology is not really necessarily new. You said in your book that the Egyptians were brewing beer 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, and that there's a lot of fermented products already on the market, like we just mentioned corn, the meatless meat, but also coffee and chocolate and Tabasco sauce. I had no idea that these were fermented foods.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess I need to get to the punchline on, why I'm so excited by fermentation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So aside from just the fact that we've actually been doing it for a long time, and, something that we know, works well in a food context, the other advantage is just the numbers, just the production numbers. They just blow animal technology out of the water. So to put this in perspective, so if we had a bathtub sized bioreactor, so something say running like a corn process, that could replace about 10,000 cows.
Wow.
So kind of going back to the regenerative, animal agriculture argument, those proponents for regenerative animal agriculture, talk about like environmental benefits. But to me, like, okay, let's have a reactor that replaces 10,000 cows and just free up all that land and do whatever we want with it. We
Yeah.
can plant more trees, we can revitalize wildlife. It just gives us much more flexibility when it comes to the good we can do.
Yeah. And if it's 10,000 cows, then it must be 100,000 or more chickens, and probably well above that fish, because their little bodies are so much smaller. Yeah. So it seems like, you could really, just save so many animals' lives with this technology.
100%. Yes. You could probably save, yeah. So if one bioreactor is 10,000 cows, yes, I would agree with that math. It's probably about 100,000 chickens at least.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. And like you said, also being able to rewild that land, bring it back to its natural state, make it a carbon sink. So it's sequestering carbon. That's what we need so badly, is way more land that is rewilded and sequestering carbon. So there's companies that are now looking at ways to use this technology to create not only just meat, but like whey and casein and gelatin, all of those kind of byproducts of animals that we use for so many different things. So this technology you could use for anything like that, right?
Yes, absolutely. But yes, just at a high level, yeah, I'm just really excited by the burgeoning number of companies, investing into microbial fermentation. And, I actually had the opportunity to try a microbial fermentation steak about a month ago.
Oh, wow.
And it was so good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's been probably like 20 years since I've actually had a steak.
Right.
But so not that I can,
really compare. Yeah.
really compare.
Yeah.
But if I were to be able to buy it at a grocery store at a reasonable price, I totally would.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Wonderful. So there's companies now that are working on this. And so we can do meat, fish flesh, I'm assuming chicken flesh. What do you see coming down the pipe with this fairly, in the more recent, maybe in 5 years or so?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yeah, so in the horizon, in the past few years, we've seen the biggest progress with the milks. 10 years ago, the best you could do in terms of in terms of alternative milk was soy milk. But now you have almond milk, oat milk, macadamia nut milk.
Yeah.
It's just pea milk.
Cashew, hemp, everything. Yeah.
Everything. And I think even like my local Starbucks has, 3 different kinds of alternative milks.
Yeah.
We've seen great progress with the ground meats. So, things like ground beef in terms of like the Impossible Burger, the Beyond Burger. And I would say what's next on the horizon is our cheese. So cheese is still, a really hard problem. Vegan cheeses right now tend to rely on starches and gums in order to get, that stretchiness and meltability that dairy cheese has. And dairy cheese is able to, stretch and melt because of the casein protein. So the casein protein imparts all these functions that are in dairy cheese.
And a casein is a specific animal protein. Right?
It's a specific animal protein. Yeah. Yes. And there's unfortunately no obvious analog in the plant or microbial world. And right now, I would say this is actually like a holy grail of the alternative food space. So my company, we're looking for it in the plant world and, just trying to see if we can, have plant products that, reproduce the function, or plant ingredients that reproduce the function of casein. And then, there are companies such as Perfect Day that are taking this fermentative approach of taking the gene for casein and then trying to grow it, in microbes in a fermentation.
Okay, now, so let me unpack that a little bit. So you said take the gene. So that's not taking it from the animal. Does this start with an animal cell?
It does not. No.
Right. So, that's what I thought. It's completely plant-based.
Yes. It's fungi or bacterial based.
Right. Well, okay. So not animal though, not a sentient animal.
Right.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, yes. So there's no sentient animal involved in the process. So the gene is already known. So this is really just letters at this point on a
Oh,
screen.
interesting. Okay. Okay.
So we know everyone might recall that DNA is, four letters, ACGT, right?
Okay.
And so a gene is the sequence of these ACGTs to, code for something like a casein protein. And so this can actually just be completely synthesized, without an animal. So you can actually physically synthesize a DNA gene with that sequence of ACGTs. And then that completely newly synthesized DNA sequence slash gene can be inserted into bacteria or fungi. And then the bacteria or fungi now have instructions to produce the casein protein.
Wow. Wow, that's fascinating. That's amazing. Okay, well, I feel like I could just ask 100 questions about this, about specifically about this fermentation process. But I did want to move us in a different direction for just a bit because I found this really interesting as well in your book. I actually went into this book. I started reading this book thinking that you would be a proponent of cell-based meat. What it has so many names now. The lab-grown meat, sometimes called cultured meat, clean meat. I think clean meat is one that they're going with more recently. And this is, I'll explain, is where they actually do take a cell, a sample from a living animal and replicate it. But you actually don't see this as a viable or long-term strategy, and you prefer the microbial fermentation technology. And I found this really interesting. I'm not a fan of the cultured meat either. I can understand and see the benefit. I see why so many in the animal rights community promote it. But there are some in the animal rights community that have issue with it, and there's lots of reasons. I don't want to get into all the reasons, but one that bothers me, the one that bothers me the most, is that we're still using animals. We're still taking a living cell from a living animal, and it's actually meat. We're actually growing meat. So we're still seeing animals as food, as commodities. It doesn't feel like animal liberation to me. And I feel like there has to be that what I might call connective tissue of speciesism, liberation, recognizing speciesism with this shift in food. I feel like the clean meat, the cell-based meat doesn't have that component, that animal liberation component. And what concerns me is that we could possibly too easily slip back into meat eating if we don't recognize speciesism, or it could just reduce to a seemingly sustainable level of meat, and animals will still suffer. So we wouldn't have total animal liberation is what I'm concerned about with this technology. But you have a different reasoning for veering away from this technology. So can you tell us why in your book you do implore animal activists not to promote cell-based meat?
Yes, thanks, Hope. This is a great question. Yeah, so I guess maybe it's first worth disambiguating like all the terms here, just
Yeah.
because
It
you
gets
know
confusing.
there's
Yeah.
a lot of nuance.
Yeah.
Yes, so and yes, as you highlighted, the terminology blurs and is often convoluted.
Yeah.
So I'll use it definitionally as follows. So yeah, so I talk about fermentation-based meat, and what I mean by fermentation-based meat is that's a microbe. So that's a bacterium, or a single cell fungi that's producing the meat.
Mm.
And then yeah, hope the cultured meat, or I'll use the term in vitro meat because I think that's the most precise term, is yes, taking a viable stem cell from an animal and then using that in a bioreactor to grow it into a full-blown steak or chicken breast. So in terms of ethics, I think we can both appreciate that veganism is not a monolith, and people have different reasons for entering veganism, ethical reasons included. And I consider myself first and foremost an ethical vegan. The commodification of animals I will admit I see less of a problem with. For me, the more extant problem is just the magnitude of unnecessary suffering. So that's really, what motivates me. That's really what rouses me. And so I could see a scenario where it's at least like more ethically palatable. You could have like, say, a feather, being able to turn, that one feather into a process that's basically replacing, chicken breasts from chickens just seems like a very noble effort, in my
Sure.
view.
Yeah, I agree.
So, I just want to be transparent about my stance there.
Sure.
But yeah, my concerns are actually more practical. I actually see the process of taking a stem cell and then growing it into, say, a chicken breast as being very, very difficult for scientific reasons. So you have to basically change how bioreactors are designed. So one issue is that stem cells are notoriously delicate. So you have to have like a very delicate bioreactor, and bioreactors are just generally not meant for that. they
Hmm.
tend to just put a lot of force on the cells.
Hmm.
So things like bacteria and yeast are just much more hardy to the way we run bioreactors. And then also just like the programming aspect of it. So you take the stem cell and then you have to program it into becoming, a chicken breast. And that's not a trivial process. So that requires very precise like control over the chemical environment and the physical environment. So you have to, give the right chemicals, the right times. It just seems to me to be a very difficult process to develop. And in the long run, I think it might not even matter, because kind of going back to what we're seeing about, technology replacing other technology, microbial fermentation, still just might be better in the long run. And so why try to go for this in vitro meat technology that's just going to be really difficult and, very fraught? We should just skip that altogether and go to microbial fermentation.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, and I do hear you. I understand that there's good intention in the in vitro meat, and I would assume that the majority of people are in it for really altruistic reasons. I think my concerns are kind of philosophical and big picture, so it's a little not on the practical level, but I do see, I understand the altruistic intentions, but still feel uncomfortable with it, that it's actually meat,
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting. So I really love this what did you call it? Fermentation based meat. Is that what you called it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So cool.
And actually, I just want to respond to that. So I do think sensibilities just about the ethics of veganism are just going to continue to grow and grow and grow as the alternative food industry just expands. And we're seeing this right now in the UK. I heard a stat that something like a third of new restaurants in London are plant-based.
Wow.
And a lot of what's driving that, just from the surveys that I've seen, is a concern for ethics. So people are just, increasingly concerned about the suffering and, commodification of animals, as you're
Yeah.
highlighting. I see it as these two forces really working together: the technological forces, just creating and making better alternatives. And then at the same time, it just makes it easier and easier for people, to grow their sensibilities.
Mm. Yeah, and be in line with their values. I'm actually curious. I have another question. Can this fermentation process work for materials like leather?
Yes, actually. And there are a couple of companies working on that. So there's
Really?
MicroWorks. Yeah. So fairly local to where I live. So MicroWorks is working on leather, and they're releasing their material on luxury handbags. And then
Oh, so
there's
they're already kind of going to be bringing this leather to market soon.
they are, yes,
Wow.
and
Okay.
yes, and so they're starting with expensive handbags, and of course the plan is to expand to get to something more affordable and
Hmm.
and more scalable. And there's also a company, Geltor, which is focusing on fermentation based collagen and gelatin,
Ah.
which, have a variety of material uses. So,
And a
there's,
lot in beauty products.
yes,
Yeah, yeah.
makeup. Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. So they're partnering with makeup companies that can use their fermentation derived collagen gelatin. And collagen gelatin are also key components of leather. So I could see that
Oh,
being roped into a leather process as well.
okay. Wow. Fascinating. So, what do you think are the most important efforts that someone interested in a vegan future can do?
Yes. So I think we need to normalize veganism. So we need more people just to be proud and to be unabashed about,
Mm,
being vegan.
yeah.
I think a lot about, the non-religious movement of, the 90s and early 2000s, where, I felt like a pariah for espousing a disbelief in God and not being religious. And today it's just not a big deal. Like it's actually just a fairly uninteresting, factoid, if anything.
Uh-huh.
And I'm waiting for that day with veganism. I think we're going to get to that day where it's just totally commonplace and nondescript, even getting to a point where it's the default expectation of everyone.
Yeah, yeah.
And the way that occurs is just by, just being public with it. Obviously, vegans have this unfair characterization as being obnoxious. But, I think being good role models, inviting non-vegans to dinner parties, just being a part of the world, I think is a huge effort that every vegan can do to, push progress.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, some other big ticket items is, getting rid of animal agriculture subsidies.
Yeah.
These subsidies, prop up a dying industry. We need to let this industry die. These subsidies just make it harder. And I would love to see more advocacy / lobbying to try to get the United States government to decrease the amount of subsidies going to animal agriculture.
Yeah. Such a good point. So, you've published this book, After Meat. What's next for you in terms of your advocacy work?
Yes. So I'm still working on content and, promoting the book, doing podcasts, such as this one and interviews and, just trying to, spread the gospel whenever I can
Uh-huh.
about, animals being a subpar technology. Yeah. And so one of the reasons I wrote After Meat was to really try to reach this left-brained audience when it comes to veganism.
Mhm.
So I think veganism has done a great job
And you
reaching.
and you mean by what you mean by that is more kind of an intellectual and technological level, maybe? Is that what you mean by
Exactly.
that? Okay. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think about, like, my graduate school colleagues, people I did my doctorate program with, who, are just really smart analytical people, but have this profound ethical blind spot
Mm.
and can't necessarily be swayed by, their heartstrings being tugged at. But they can be very swayed by, a technological argument and seeing that, we're going to be able to do better. And it's actually not going to be a compromise in terms of taste, cost, and nutrition.
It's very logical.
Yeah, yeah. And so to that end, yes, I'm doing more promotion of the book. And then beyond that, I'm also generating content based off of the book and, expanding on it further. And so a couple things I'll highlight. So one was a recent piece I wrote talking about shifting the curve. And what I mean by that is, so in the long run, we're going to have a vegan future. Like it's inevitable. There's very little that anyone can do to prevent that. So the question is, how soon can we, get to that vegan future, right? Can we get there, in 10 years versus 20 years?
Mm.
If we can move up the timeline, that just has profound positive consequences.
Yeah.
So to put it in perspective, something like 70 billion animals are slaughtered every year for animal agriculture, right? And if you think about your effort of advocacy or ordering a vegan meal at a restaurant that doesn't have many vegan meals, you can kind of think of it as, moving this curve up in terms of the timeline. And it's significant. So 70 billion animals per year translates to 8 million animals for 1 hour. right? So, you have an effort that shifts the timeline up by 1 hour, you save 8 million animals. That's
Wow.
incredible.
Yeah.
So it's not just, the animals saved by the meat avoided. It's also the animals saved by shifting this curve up.
Well, Karthik, I have enjoyed this so much and I have learned so much, and it's just been really, really fascinating. I wish we could talk all day, but we do need to wrap up. And I like to end with this question. What gives you hope for the future?
Yes. First of all, Hope, thank you so much for the opportunity. This is a very, very fun conversation for me too. I
Yeah.
also learned a lot too, just talking with you and understanding, different perspectives in the veganism movement. What gives me hope for the future is progress. So we're starting to see glimmers of this, if not if not more glaring signals. Just this past weekend, I was on a biking trip with a friend, and we stopped by a random cafe in Richmond, California. So this was a cafe like I had never been to, and about 80% of the baked goods were vegan.
Wow.
And I didn't go on a happy cow or anything to search for this place. I just
Right.
just happened upon it, and I was just blown away. And it just goes to that hope slash expectation I have, for the normalization of veganism, and really getting us past this calamitous industry.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what drives me. And as you mentioned, my day job is working at Climax Foods, so I get to join the fray directly. And yeah, I will continue to push and continue to hope for the future.
Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful.
There was actually one last thing
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
would be great to mention. Yeah, so all the proceeds of After Meat are being donated to causes that spur this vegan future.
Wow.
So groups like Fun Analytics, which does a lot of research and
Yes. Yeah.
generates a lot of data. And then also, I don't want money to be a reason that people can't access the book. So it's actually downloadable if you go to my website. So there are links for both the audiobook as well as a litany of different digital versions.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, we'll be sure to include those in the show notes so people can link to them easily.
Perfect.
Great. Thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for this amazing book. And I'm also excited for An Amazing Meat Free World, which is the subtitle of your book. So thank you so, so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Hope.
Thank you for listening to the Hope for the Animals podcast. I love that Karthik said that a vegan future is inevitable and that there's very little anyone can do to stop that from happening. It's so exciting to me and hopeful to me. And you know how you hear about something or you hear a new word or a new concept and suddenly it's everywhere? Well, I just got an email from Veg News the day that I'm writing the notes for this podcast that was talking about a new company making animal-free which is an animal protein, using, and I'll quote the email here, precision fermentation where microflora, tiny living organisms used in everyday items such as vitamins and probiotics, take the place of a cow in creating dairy identical milk proteins. So they're talking about this new fermentation technology that we were just talking about in the interview. So this new tech is here. The future is vegan, folks. If you felt that this episode was informative and interesting, please support us and help us to reach more listeners. If you're listening on an app, scroll down and give us that 5-star rating or write a review. If you have the means, perhaps you can support us with a small monthly donation on Patreon and be a patron of the show. Thank you for caring about the earth and all her animals. Happy Earth Day. Do something special for the earth for Earth Day. Show this precious planet, our beautiful home, that you want to love and protect her and live vegan.